Today I'm going to talk about higher consciousness. What is it and how can we attain it? We've all probably heard of this idea of higher consciousness. It's a word that's bandied about a lot by all different types of people. And I think everybody has a kind of a different view about what it is and how to get there. And some of them, I think, are people suffering perhaps a bit from a sort of a delusion about I'm in a higher state than you are sort of thing. Other people that have misunderstood this whole idea of enlightenment and what it can be. And of course the psychologists have also tried to frame this idea too in terms of their own ideas and their own theories. So I suppose there's no definitive answer, although there's only one truth and one higher state. So I'm going to try to explain it to you as I understand higher consciousnesses, and maybe give you a few simple ideas about ways we can get to that. So first of all, what is it? Let's think. Now the psychologists, I've seen psychologists talk about higher consciousness and try to sort of throw it into this idea, oh, this is mystics talking a load of nonsense. What it really is just the functions of the brain. Okay, because they see everything in terms of brain. Nothing can exist beyond the human brain. So they talk about, Freud was the first actually to talk about this. He tried to define the idea of consciousness as being in three levels. The conscious mind, the pre-conscious mind, and then the unconscious mind. And then this went on to talk, like people like Carl Jung talked about consciousness and the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious and so forth. So they were already thinking about this idea that there's like levels of consciousness, that consciousness is not one thing in particular. We are conscious sometimes and then we're semi-conscious as well. And even in the East we got things like the idea that there's this idea of that we have a conscious state, we have the sleep state, and we have the superconscious state. So all of this can get a little bit confusing, particularly when the psychologists start to try to sort of force it into their theories. Talk about that we have like a lower mind, what they call the reptilian mind. Okay, so there's this idea that there's this part of ourselves that's kind of the nasty side of ourselves, the one that will react rather than think about things, the one that has is limited, has a limited image of ourselves too, sees ourselves perhaps through the eyes of the animal self of the human being, the body's mind, the old ancient mind, hence the idea of reptilian. And psychology also talks about this idea of the neocortex, which they consider as being the higher mind. This is like the imaginative mind, the part of ourselves that can have like empathy, for example, care for others and be able to see beyond our own selfish behaviour. We have the neocortex would, for example, be more tolerant and have tolerance and have a bit more of a universal perspective of things. But this doesn't explain this whole idea of higher consciousness. They try to sort of then say like things like what we call the oceanic experience, where we feel the sort of the vastness of the universe. They try to sort of tie that down as being something about the opening of our part of our mind that sees that material reality as vast and beautiful. But it goes beyond that, because if you've ever touched that point in yourself of higher consciousness, you will know that it's accompanied by not just a feeling but a knowing that you're beyond this material existence. There's what we call the oceanic feeling. I think that's a lovely word, that in many respects, but also another word that's misunderstood. It's like feeling that you're not just a drop but a part of this great ocean of existence. And on one level it works in this world as a form of inspiration. The wonders of this landscape, for example, and you feel that upliftment, that inspiration and joy. And some interpret that as this idea of enlightenment, that it's the oneness, that we're the oneness of things, but it's still in the realm of feeling, of dualistic experience, as it were. So it's a good thing because it's pointing us to the higher levels that lie beyond it. This is why I very much feel that creative people are very close to the divine state, because they touch that inspired feeling that often only artists experience, but you can experience through their art, through music for example, and feel lifted and inspired and part of something much bigger, you know. So, but it's just the edge of it. It's just the edge of it. Don't interpret that as the enlightened experience. And sometimes people will go through a state of extreme stress, you know, where they've been in extreme stress to the point they almost want to die, you know. And there's almost a point that comes in some people where they kind of almost die, you know, because their mind dies out of despair. And then they come out of that, and there's this other kind of ephemeral sort of, what's the word for it? My brain's going. This realization, you know, this sort of sense of sudden release from all the horrors of what they were previously. It's like the brain will suddenly kick in and open up a sense of absolutely higher perception. But that also is not the enlightened experience. That is the release from the despair, as it were. So this often happens in people that I've met who talk about the enlightened experience. It's an escape from something that was terrible before and now is marvellous. And they get a momentary epiphany, that was the word I'm looking for, a kind of an epiphany moment, you know. And that can be, again, drawing close to the ultimate experience, the higher consciousness that I want to talk about here. But it's not the final higher consciousness. It's still the edge of it. You know, you might see it's like a revelation, beings of light, or a sense of being in touch with the angelic world. But still, it's close to the divine, but it's not the ultimate experience. And it's almost impossible to explain that ultimate experience. And yet I'm sure that many of you that are watching this have kind of touched it sometimes, and know that it's something that you can't even begin to verbalize, because it's beyond everything psychological. It's beyond everything we know in terms of this dualistic world, this world of the material world. It can't be encapsulated in any thought, and yet we know it is, and yet it's of this world but not of this world. We know that the whole world is it, and yet this world is not it, if you see what I mean. And that's where it gets difficult, because, you know, people say, you know, these mystics, they go off on this airy-fairy thinking. That is because it's indescribable. You know, we're talking about, the only way you can describe the highest levels of consciousness is, I don't know, words like infinite come to mind. Words like love come to mind. Words like truth come to mind. Words like infinity, infinite bliss, infinite light. But all of those are things like come to mind. The final experience is beyond the mind itself. And yet, and this is what I think is important, it's not separate. So everything we realise is this absolute state. Some call it God, but again, that starts again to put things into all sorts of belief systems. You know, what God? What's that? A man in the sky? God? Is it a force that's outside of myself telling me to do something? God? Is it me? And if it's me, what is it in me? You know, we can't even call it God, because that is full of so many misconceptions as well. We can only say it's something beyond everything we can possibly understand. And yet, it is not blank, empty nothingness, and yet it is as well. But it's not like negative. It's like the absolute ultimate joy of life. It's life itself, and it's the universe itself becoming conscious. And it's so vast, we can't even begin to encapsulate the smallest part of it. That's what higher consciousness is to me. And it's not something separate. And sometimes, and I think some of you must have had this experience too, we enter that state and we are just, you know, it's all so simple. It's so easy. it's just self-evident, you know. You come out with that sense of it's just all love, you know, or it's just all truth, or it's just all consciousness. You know, even that doesn't describe it. And then we fall back into our misconceptions. We fall back into this mind that I'm using now and trying to explain it. We fall back into our ignorance. We fall back into our karma. And yet, at the same time, we know that that too is part of that higher consciousness. So, I think it's important to understand that there's no final point that you can come to where you say, I'm in a state of higher consciousness. Because as soon as you realise you're in a state of higher consciousness, you've fallen away from it, if you see what I mean. It does get complicated, doesn't it, if you're trying to get this with the rational mind. But I think some of you will understand how this happens. It's not an external experience, it's not a mind experience, it's something that goes beyond that. You know, it's something that you know. But then we understand that the whole world that's around us, everything that's here, everything that I'm looking at in this room, and you're looking at me, and you're looking at the screen, all of this is just, I like to think of it as just the mind of the universe. You could call it the mind of God. It's all the mind of God. It's all that same experience of consciousness. It's all consciousness. It's all love. It's all infinite existence. It doesn't have a beginning. It doesn't have an end. It doesn't have a middle. It doesn't have a now. It doesn't have a then. You know, it doesn't have time, and yet it is time. And that's why I think people that are coming at this with a very rational psychological viewpoint find all this sort of thing very hard to understand, because unless you've had the experience, you can't describe it. You can't even begin to conceptualize it. You're seeing it through that logical brain that is perhaps in some ways the very enemy of the experience itself. So in the end, I suppose it's all basically love. You know, that's when people try to explain what it's all about, and you try to put it in a simple way, you think, well, it's all just love. You know, the whole universe is just love. Everything, the beginning of existence is just love. And what you know, we understand love, okay, emotionally, yeah, there's not emotional love, no. Compassion, well, not strictly even compassion. It's prema, they call it in Vedic things. Yeah, well, yes, but not even that, because that's a concept. It's just, but when you become one with something, when the meditator becomes one with the point of meditation, when you join it, when you're one with it, you realise that there's nothing that can ever harm you in this life. That it's all just pure love evolving. And even in the most horrible things, there's love there, you know? So even that's a word that can't explain it, you know? And then others have talked about enlightenment, light, you see. Light is another way you can kind of describe this state of higher consciousness. But again, how you can't even explain that. You know, it's not even light. Light is something separate from me. Light is within, yeah, but it's not light that's shining in darkness. It's a light that is the darkness and the light together. Okay. So there you go. That's kind of the best way I can describe it. And, you know, you can see from my words that I'm useless at describing this. How can I explain it even? However, there's a part of you that knows this already. There's a part of you that says, yes, Craig, I understand that. You've probably not expressed it exactly as I would have done, but yeah, you're kind of onto it, you know. And we all have it. We all have those moments where we get close to that understanding of the absoluteness of the existence, of the infinite, the beauty of it all. We have different ways of understanding it. And I think, how do we get to that state? We can use things like meditation. Right, okay, so meditation has two aspects to it. It has the aspect which is keeping the mind focused, and keeping the mind focused so it doesn't wander off all the time in these other places. So we're here and now, we're in the present, and that's the concentration. Some call it mindfulness, which is just another word for yogic concentration. That's bringing yourself back to the present all the time, which we do with our eyes closed, with our legs crossed or whatever. And then we go into a state beyond that where we're at one with it, we're in the flow of things, which has become the meditation, and then finally we get into that state where we're no longer meditating, or we're in that state that they call samadhi, which is another word to explain those things that I've been trying to explain here. But we can't stay in meditation day and night. And I know that if I sit in my meditation room there, something's going to knock the door. Something in life will come and pull me out again, and trouble will come my way. And I'm back in the old world, and my mind is moving along in the wrong places again, So I think we have to understand that everything is you and me. It's you. All is you. And everything that's happening to you, everything that comes into your life, is something that's come here because it's a part of you that still needs to be resolved, right? So every situation we're in, every word that is said, sounds like paranoia, doesn't it? But it's not if you think about it. Everything that is said to us, everything that comes into our life is part of our evolving consciousness, because it's all consciousness. Now, we've got to be stable in ourselves with this, and not go off into the schizophrenic's state of where it becomes paranoid, where everything threatens you, right? But everything is there to support you. Everything there is part of the love of the universe. And in our minds, sometimes we're fully awake to this and fully awake to the understanding that all is consciousness. And then there's other times, we're all in it, where we fall completely asleep, where we're walking through this world in a sleep state, where we fall again victim to all sorts of crazy things, and anger and jealousies and pettiness and all these silly things that every person has locked in them somewhere, polluting that divine consciousness. But we just accept it. Be aware of the fact that we are always moving through different states of consciousness. And that's how I think we can get to higher consciousness in daily life. Because that's what it's got to be. Not just in the meditation room, but in daily life. To be there all the time. And accepting yourself that sometimes you're going to be a blithering idiot. Other times you're going to be an enlightened being. All of us. And that doesn't mean I'm better than you or you're better than someone else and so on. We're just all in it. Sometimes we're awake, sometimes we're not. Sometimes some people get it for fractions of a second. Some people have it sustained long periods. Some people, perhaps the great teachers, have it all their lives. So we're moving all the time between levels of consciousness. Sometimes we're high and into the higher consciousness. And it's not even higher, actually. And that's still another misconception. But we're in that other state of consciousness. And other times we're not. And that way, if you're tolerant with yourself, and you allow your mind to go through the flow, knowing that sometimes you're weak and sometimes you're strong, and that there's another you, as it were, that can be constantly observing this, noticing that, I'm higher state now, or no, I'm in a lower state now. There's that awareness of you, that awareness of the thoughts coming into you, and awareness of the way you interact with the world. That's the way, that sheer observation is all you need. And then you will enter that state where you start to feel it with your whole being, not just with your mind, but with your whole being. You start to see, like I talked about before, that behind it all, there's this fantastic existence that it can perhaps be just described as just a constant process of becoming, a constant process of the unfolding of the love of the universe, a constant expression of bliss and joy, because that's all it ultimately is, even in the dark places that can be found. Okay, I've talked enough, and I've not described it very well, but that is one take on this idea of higher consciousness. I have given some techniques in some of my books. I'm an author, forgive me, I've got to push my books. Psychic School, I think, is one of the books that you might enjoy. There's a particular meditation in there that teaches you how to open the chakras. It's kind of a simplified version of the ideas of the fires of Kundalini, but in a way that is much more gentle. And I've also put that meditation onto a video, and I'll try to put it at the end of this this video now, and pop it up as a clip at the end, so you can follow that meditation as well, just as a simple way to get started with this idea of tuning into the absolute. Okay, well, thank you for joining us again, and don't forget, if you click that little bell thing at the bottom of the screen there, if you're new to this channel, you can follow us and get updates every time I put up a new video. And if you really get interested in it, do follow our work as a patron, in which you can get some behind the scenes stuff as well. Okay, thanks for joining us. See you soon. Bye for now. My wife Jane and I do our public work for free. We raise money through the theatres to raise money for our Hamilton Parker Foundation. This is a not-for-profit company that is soon to be registered as a charity. Now, our work is going in to help with the objectives of this charity, but you can help us as well by becoming what we call a patron of this channel. Now, as a patron, you'll get, first of all sorts of really interesting benefits. You'll have a sort of behind the scenes look at what goes on with our work. You'll get videos before other people. You'll get new videos. You'll get all sorts of benefits that are explained in the patron website, and it has various tiers that you can subscribe to. So you can subscribe to just a little bit and get a few benefits, or you can subscribe a lot and get a lot of benefits. And what this means is that we can raise some money through this channel. Now, this money's not going to me and Jane to give us a fancy lifestyle. This money is going into our foundation that has some fantastic objectives. Now, the first thing we want to do with the foundation is, first of all, get a cyber center together, a cyber temple, as it were, a place where we can introduce new people to you through this channel. So by supporting this channel and giving something to the as a patron, you will find that this channel will start to get better and better content with more and more interesting things going on. We'll be able to get the cameras, we'll be able to have the space, we'll be able to have the right setting where we can build the energy to do things such as mediumistic circles and so forth online. But also our work extends further than that, because we are hoping ultimately to build a spiritual center, a psychic ashram, as it were, where people like you can come to visit and take part in an interactive way through this channel as well. But also we are doing a lot of what we call spiritual service. We are going out and giving a large part of the income we generate to people in India who are destitute. We've given to schools, we've fed children that are in need, we've helped mentally handicapped people, we've given cows to old people in India. Some of all this you'd have seen in my movie Mystic Journey to India on Amazon. But all of this is part of our mission, part of our remit to help the world. Because we're not only trying to find our divine nature, we're also trying to live what we learn and express it in ways that are really beneficial to the world. So if you follow this channel, but more importantly, if you become a patron of this channel, you can help us to take this whole mission onto a much higher level than any psychic work has ever been done before.